My middle brother had a jealousy streak a mile long against myself, dating further back to my days at 𝗕𝗿𝗄 High School. And a graduation would clearly had painted a really not so promising picture of it. After going to a restaurant for dinner/breakfast in Redding, California, while visiting my brother Carter, my parents and I think during a spring break earlier that year, or maybe a winter break, I don't know which, because it was a very wet, stormy day and all that back then. And having a strong conversation about myself graduating in June the 16th, 1988. This conversation was what happened when my brother Carter didn't graduate from high school back then. And these stories are many stories that were kept not so much a secret, but it was many of those stories that were hidden from so many for the past 40-something years. And I'm kind of telling the story right now because my brother Carter, who's my middle brother at the time, had decided to do a lot of this stuff, and it wasn't a considered opinion. But after I had moved into Del Nido Apartments back in the 1980s, late 1980s, 1989 to 1990. But I think much of this was considered because he was a sort of person that was keeping secrets, but sometimes the secrets were hidden and between the lamppost and the telephone pole. Back then, we were just a family that was going through some very, very unusual times too, because a year before, in 1985, my dad had to go in for back surgery. But also in 1985, that was not one of the best years for me in high school. It was a very, very not so wonderful year. But by 1986, I was going to work at 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗽𝗃𝗃 under the direction of a friend by the name of 𝗕𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, who was one of my supposed teachers, who had me proper trained and had me skilled for whatever lays ahead. And this sort of mutual admiration society supposedly angered my brother Carter at best. Carter was a person who was in the type of stuff that was no more or no less like Peter Pettigrew. Peter Patrick Pettigrew. And Carter was the type of person that was hiding in the shadows of all of the stuff that was going on during those years. And he got involved with a lady by the name of 𝗕𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. Renee O'Brien's family was one of the best honored families, the O'Briens. Well, Carter tried to scam the O'Briens. But back then, by 1986, the O'Briens, in my book and world, asked Renee to do what was considered as to have Carter divorced or the marriage annulled, because Renee and Carter was discovered a scam artist and a con artist and a swindler who stole money from numerous people back in those days. But this wasn't proven because Carter was who he was. And no matter how many people had claimed this, it was quite considerable. But by the time my sister's passing in 2010, he became very, very much obsessed with getting a house in Freestone at 13277 Highway in Freestone, California, and 𝗕𝗏𝗶𝗱𝗃𝗃, California, because Carter, on the other hand, wasn't very much the type of person that was dealing in money and other stuff or handling his money very well. So he moved into a house after my mom had given him an ultimatum to move out of her house. My mom was the kind of person that knew that Carter had a lot of delusions of grandeur at the time. But this information goes further back to that point, back in the late 1990s. The last year that Carter was living in their house was in 1996, when my parents moved to Brookings, Oregon. But Carter and Joanne were trusted, and they were trusted within a shadow of a doubt of my parents, and so forth. But this was back when we were younger, when I was a younger family member who generally was blind to the ideas of this factor back then, and this was known fact between even the street people that were living on the streets back in the 1990s. They were just as much a product of that time also, and they were the product of the time. They were people that fell through the cracks. They didn't to many of the situation, and it was known factor between those people that my brother Carter may have had a hand in most of the stuff that was going on in 1990, and after they laid me off from Hewlett-Packard and had been considering those factors. But Carter may have had a long hand in so many things that did happen and would happen, because throughout that, it was known fact that I was riding high on the factors of those. I mean, riding high, meaning being considered the golden son of the entire family. And that prompted my brother Carter to either implant these people or considered these people as that factor. But this was a fact that my sister didn't know. And it was known fact that he planted, I think, the people that were taking advantage of me back in 1990. Carter, on the other fact, was who he was. And he had little or no understanding between who, what, where, and when. And it was known that he was involved in a lot of stuff during that time, including the stuff that did take place throughout throughout most of the house and throughout most of everything that was going on. He involved himself in a lot of people's lives, and this dates back to quite a few years ago. You see, in that time, it was known that the apple never falls far from the tree. He just wasn't the type of person that was the actual person that was involved. But that was more true than false, because we didn't know who was the puppet master on this factor. But I knew, according to my empathic awareness, that there was somebody involved in most of all of this, including the puppet master that was playing games either with anybody that had the good enough sense. And this was one of the reasons why I moved out of Santa Rosa altogether, was the same order that was going through many houses. And there was a lot of other stuff that happened in our house at the time before this. And I think it was that there was more to it than the roommates that were living in my dad's house. And it became well known between the roommates that my dad was renting to and my brother Carter, who was living in the area of Freestone. He was the linchpin between every roommate that my dad was renting to, including the ones that he trusted off of the street or had trusted through some not so wonderful contacts throughout after my mom's passing and my sister's passing. And we didn't know, and I didn't know, because it was quite easy to realize connecting the two together and connecting the many together to one person. And it wasn't the neighbor next door to my dad. It was my brother Carter, at best, because Carter had cultivated this plan quite a few years ago. But unbeknownst to my sister, who really found out way later, after my brother-in-law was cultivated into this factor too. But many of the people outside the factors, including my eldest brother Waverly, who was bipolar, who generally accused a lot of people of other stuff, was another version of Peter Patrick Pettigrew. Many of the Peter Patrick Pettigrews that were involved were not actually central figures of these factors. My mom was an innocent bystander on this level, an innocent person. My dad was innocent. My sister was innocent. But my brother Waverly fell under the suspicions because he was bipolar at the time. But my brother Carter was actually the puppet master. And he was fired from numerous jobs prior to the graduation, when he moved out near West 3rd Street and the Stony Point area with his fair weather friends, which I'm not going into names about. But Carter, on the other hand, was numerous on this level. And he played a part in getting my dad evicted from his house at the time, which I'm writing this as a key clincher to the understanding of it. Carter had his hand in a lot of stuff back in the good old days. He had his hand in everything from proving stuff and not proving stuff. So what I did was, I'm writing these videos to shed some light on this subject. And he tried to drive a wedge between my dad and myself because he was he thought that it would have been obvious that my dad and I, we were both like together, and that would have caused nothing but problems back in those days. And I think he was responsible for my dad talking about the world and talking about political stuff and all that type of business. But actually, my dad was not into that type of stuff. It was Carter who was the puppet master of the whole situation. So I'm quite understanding of this, and I know who it was and who was involved in most of the stuff that was going on. He had his hand in a lot of stuff. And if a court uses this, I'm speaking the facts itself. And I'm speaking very clearly that no matter how much was going on, I want to make sure that everybody knows the truth and knows the truth about what really took place in my dad's house. Carter stole those checks and didn't realize that nobody was speaking up at the time and nobody was coming forward. But with this video, I'm actually coming forward on this. But I think it was based on a lot of jealousy and a lot of anger and a lot of jealousy that was going on, that Carter had gotten the best of those factors. And he tried everything in the book that he could try, but not to mention many situations. I think he was the puppet master of all stuff. And I wanted no part of it at the time. I wanted no part of it. I was completely washing my hands of it and everything else, because that was pretty much what it was. And I had to start all over again and rebuild. And in 2023, I think my brother Carter had his hand in some other stuff that was not his actual concern. And he had his hand in the situation and his hand in the cookie jar. But and I think and what he was dead to me when all this was going on. And in 2023, he had his hand in my career and had his hand in stuff that wasn't his concern in the first place. Excuse me. And so I'm just making my fact very clear that if anybody looks at this video, I think my brother Carter had his hand in a whole bunch of people's lives. And he had his hand in stuff that wasn't really a considered opinion. It's like putting a thing of soap in front of a door, trying to trip somebody. But if you try to trip somebody and you trip somebody else, you're in bigger trouble than you know what to do with, because who knows who you might be tripping. You could be, you could trip the store director and he might fall on his butt, and he might, or some manager might come after that and probably sue your Rumpty Dumpty into the next century. Carter had made that mistake, and he could have, and he didn't want to trip a store director or a first assistant or a third person or anybody that was in management, because if he did that and he discovered I was in management, he would have had himself a field day on that. He would have been in very bad hot water. He would have been taken to court, probably sued, probably would have had his house taken away from him. He could have had a whole lot of stuff happening to him, all at one fell blow. That would have, and an equivalent of a 𝗦𝗵𝗱𝗍𝗂𝗍, that would have been a considered idea for what he was doing and how he was doing it. But on this video, I'm putting the truth out there. It may be, or it may have not have been, but I'm probably very aware of what he was doing and fully aware of what was going on with the store director, and back in the day in 2023, of having the store director transferred to another store because Carter was a dogged strategist. He wanted something, and he wanted it, but it landed on a whole bunch of other people. It affected other people's lives. He didn't care about other people's lives, and that was what it was. I don't know if this narrative is correct or not, but I feel that it was. He had more than his hand in the cookie jar. He had his hand in the pickle jar too. And that was what was considered those factors about him. He worked in the shadows. And that's pretty much what it was. He had his hand in the cookie jar many, many times. He scammed people, conned people, and stolen from people, because he was a thief who took stuff that didn't belong to him. He had gotten involved, and he got real handy about it. He was involved no more than the street people that stole from me back in 1990. He didn't just stop there. He could have been responsible for all the missing iPod touches that I had. He could have been responsible for the missing equipment, any of that stuff. But he was responsible for a lot more than his full measure. Carter was Carter, and that was, and who knows, who in the heck knows, because he was who he was, and this might be a lot of stuff, and who knows, he could have ran for the hills for all we know. And especially that he took my dad, tried to use whatever was considered possibly identity theft, fraud, wiretapping, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was considered, because Carter didn't work just in a stealth manner. He could have been involved with, in many of these respects, outside the fact that he could have committed fraud with a whole lot of people. And he was a fraudster and a scammer, and a rogue scammer and spammer before there were computers, and before he was able to use a computer for his type of work and whatever was considered in those factors. he took people and took advantage of people. He took advantage of people where I lived, and people that were at a local shelter, and probably many of the shelters between Santa Rosa and Petaluma, and probably many other towns. I don't know how many towns that he was involved in, but he could have been in many of them, because that was how he operated. And he scammed a lot of people that were either homeless or people that were just not able to protect themselves. And this is probably that he was a puppet master of all things. And it just irked me back in the day when I was at one of the local shelters back in 2016, that my brother took advantage of two wonderful ladies. And hopefully this video gets out that he was doing this all under the fact of jealousy, and to get back at a younger brother. And it's very, very true that these were, and it became very, very dark times back in 2010. And in 2010, my sister passed on, and this is what spawned a lot of past feelings throughout my brother Carter and so forth. And it spawned a lot of outrage and rage that was considered those factors. My dad was, at that time, he was still alive, and he was very much not in the best of situations either. But it wasn't that he wasn't in the best of health. But the problem was that my brother was involved somehow. And it got even worse after my brother Waverly passed on September 4th, 2015. But it happened even more quicker when my sister passed on November 11th, 2010. But much of this was not no considered event, but it was more than that and twice as much. But we don't know, and we may never know how much my brother Carter was involved in everything, from every person that was hired in my dad's home-based business to the time that I was. But much of this could be a considered opinion that he was a puppet master, and he had to control people's lives, and he did what was considered. He not only controlled my life, but he attempted to probably control some of my coworkers' lives. Carter was a link between what was considered, but he had more than just the power against certain things, but he was probably that. And it wasn't just the supervisor or the boss in one place. It was him, because I know that for a fact, because there could only be one person out of the many that was involved in most of this stuff. And I do know the obvious, because I know where some stuff comes from. And he was it, unfortunately. And that type of overreach was implanted in a lot of people, a whole lot of people that I discovered. And that's where I didn't want anything to do with them, because they were people that were busy doing stuff for my brother, my middle brother at the time, and that was what was considered. And I found out about it, and I know. And why I've ignored a lot of people were very, very clear, because some of those people were there for a lot of reasons, a whole bankload. And it wasn't because of this or that. It was because they were there for two reasons. My sister was one that had known this, but it's not a world. It's Carter was the major puppet master or ringmaster of all this. And I think my brother Carter was the ringmaster behind all the stuff that did take place, or how it took place, or where it took place, and pretty much. But I may be mincing words or mincing understanding, because there could only be one person that could pull off so much stuff at one point. One person out of the many, even in one small town. He had a whole lot, and he had a whole lot of considered opinion, and a whole lot of stuff that was going on. But he missed one fact out of the many, that usually the truth comes out somewhere along the line. And he was just not that type of situation, and he was too arrogant and everything else to see that. And basically, I know. I know him because I've known him for years, and I've known him since I was for that factor and how much. And my mom knew that he had delusions of grandeur. My middle brother had a lot of delusions.